Hi, I'm Joshua Barnes, and I'm joined by Al Shalloway. And today's 5 minute short is on what are classes of service. So, classes of service from a Kanban perspective are typically referred to as expedite and fixed date, standard, and intangible. And from a value stream management perspective, we oftentimes are going to look at sort of what we would consider the big rocks, right? So like minimum business increments, right? MBIs and MVPs. But then we also have outside of the big rocks, we have the small rocks and the gravel and, getting down to like sand, things like, maintenance work and paying down technical debt and improving quality issues and something that is going to keep us in compliance. So Al, from a class of service perspective, like how do we plan for this and how do we use classes of service and why does it even matter?
Well, for me, one of the big things underneath it is to say you're having people make requests of the team. Of course, we're using a pull system. Most of the time, we do use pull. Every now and then, you do push. If there's an emergency going on, that's not pull. That's hey, we got a crisis. Our site's down, or
A
whatever it is.
real crisis, though.
Yeah, and you then push that. But the point is that you're talking, that you're cooperating, and that you're stating how you're working together. And this is actually one of the biggest differences between, say, Scrum and Kanban. Now, it doesn't have to be just between those two. In the DAVSC, I talk a lot about how explicit work policies, explicit workflow is very, very critical. This is something that Scrum over the years is slowly adding as time goes on. Every now and then they add a little bit more than they had the year before, it seems. But in 2009, I remember when Kanban kind of hit the market with the Lean Kanban, the Miami Lean Kanban conference, and there was a big discussion about this. And David Anderson and I, the creators at the time of LKU, we talked about the biggest difference between Kanban and Scrum was not flow, but was this visibility, and part of the visibility is explicit workflow. Now, it doesn't mean you follow it like follow a rule. Oh, I've got process and I've got to do it. It means we've talked about it. We have an explicit conversation about how we're doing it. And this helps cooperation. This is what you want to be doing. So the ones that are typically the base in Kanban are good ones to start with. But you really want to ask yourself, is there anything else I have to look at that we're going to handle differently? So when the event occurs, we've understood it. I worked with one company years and years ago that before I even knew of class service, we just kind of made it up. We sometimes got really big chunks of work that had to be split across teams. And sometimes we had individual pieces, and we figured out a way that the multiple teams would collaborate with each other because test equipment was in short supply. And everybody on the whole project could identify being part of this like macro team anyway. So it wasn't moving people around or things like that. It was simply changing the way they collaborate. So we had this notion of it's a really big thing, we work on it this way. If it's a small thing, we work on it this way. Here's how we coordinate the priorities. And it wasn't like we followed those classes of service. It was like we had decided through conversation this was the best way to work, and the classes of service classes of service reflected that conversation. And you could change them anytime you want. But if you're talking about Agile being a cooperative game and working together, then that means you've got to talk to each other and you've got to make it clear how you're working. And that's really what classes of service are. That is an equally important piece to this. And that is, well, what are the agreements about the classes of service?
Yeah, right.
So this is what's called service level agreements. So we're not just saying these are the classes. We're saying, and here's how we're going to work on them. So like one of the classes of service is date driven. So we say, okay, well, when we need to, we'll maybe bump this up, not based on value or cost of delay, but based on that we've got to have it done by this time. Or if we have a expedite, we might have two kinds of expedite. That's what I used to do, is I put in like, oh my God, this thing just drop everything and let this guy go through. But I had another kind, which was, well, this is important, it has to happen over the next 2-3 days, but I don't need to stop work. So what we'll do is it just bumps up at each queue, it just automatically goes to the top. So it doesn't interrupt, but it gets expedited. So it's how do you want to work together? Make it explicit. Those are your classes of service, and service level agreements are your agreements on how you're going to work on them.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for attending and watching this 5 minute short. We'll see you next time.